Okay, so we're starting a new unit on basically big pictures, really evolution. But to start, we're going to start off in chapter 12, which talks about kind of a which came first. You know, Earth formed, and then after that, what was the first living thing? How did living things form? How did life actually first form? Pretty much in the oceans, aquatic areas. How did it get up on land? What were the first organisms that could get out on land? How and why? What were the challenges to doing that? So that's what we'll be looking at over the next few days. And after that, we'll be talking about Darwin and the Galapagos Islands and the theory of natural selection and how organisms have evolved over time from what we know and understand today as scientists. So to start off, we're going to start off with chapter 12, which is basically how life began and how Earth began and things like that. So to get started, I'm going to explain this assignment. I apologize if you can't read it. I should probably change the background on this. These are really key geologic, biological events that have occurred over time. Really, really important. They are out of order. And what I want you to do is to get a stack of index cards. I want you to write them down. And then I want you to go through the chapter in chapter 12 along the bottom, beginning on page 258 is a timeline. It only runs along the bottom. It goes from 258 basically through to the end of the chapter. And I would like you to put these in order, and I would like you to know these in order. You're actually going to take a quiz this Friday, and you'll be expected to know these in order. Your warm-up every day when you come in class is to get these index cards out and try to put these in order. So what you should do is write these all out on index cards, then find them on the timeline in your book. Write down the number they occur in, which one's first, which one's second, which one's third, so on and so forth, on the other side of the index card. And then scramble them every day and try to put them in order. Get them in order. You will need to know which one of these is first. I think it's pretty obvious. The first one is that Earth forms. But then after that, what happens when? Okay, and I don't expect you to know the dates of these things, how many millions of years ago, but I do expect you to know whether mammals are very abundant first or the dinosaurs are everywhere first. Which of these two happened before the other? And so there's a long list here. So I'm going to ask you to pause the video now. This should only take you about 5-10 minutes. I would just write these out, and then when the lecture's over, you can go back in your book to the timeline and number these out, and you can, of course, work together with a partner or two to get these numbered before you leave today, so that you can use them, bring those index cards with you every day that you come to class. Okay, so pause it now and write these out, and I'll be back with you in a second. Okay, so we're back. So here we go. Many years ago, one of the first ways that we thought biological molecules first formed, the big guys that we talked about in chapter 2, like lipids and carbohydrates and proteins. We had an idea they formed in the oceans, like the ocean was like a big bowl of soup. And Miller and Urey, you can read about these guys in your book. I don't know if that's Miller or Urey down here in this photo. It's one of them. They put together this apparatus where they actually put in all the key ingredients that were found in the oceans way back when, and they put the same chemicals that we find in the atmosphere. There was a lot of carbon dioxide, ammonia, things like that. They sent lightning through it, and they did actually form biological molecules. But there's a problem with this whole soup idea. Basically, what the problem is that some molecules used in this apparatus would have broken down when the sun hit them. So, and early Earth did not have an ozone layer to protect it from ultraviolet rays. So, because of that, there's an issue with this primordial soup idea. It's not quite working out. So much for Miller-Urey. We need another theory. Put our heads together. And so the more accepted idea today is actually called bubble model. It's kind of a silly name, but you can read about it. It's on page 255. And the bubbles of gases rise from the volcanoes up through the ocean. The gases are mixing in the ocean because they're trapped in these little bubbles. They're exposed to the atmosphere, but only very, very briefly. So the ultraviolet rays don't get a chance to really break them down, and then they're mixed back into the oceans. And this idea of this mixing and churning of these molecules led to these biomolecules, these rather large things like our lipids and nucleic acids and proteins and stuff like that. So that's the basics of it without going into too much detail. Now, here's one of the things you need to know. Which came first, RNA before DNA? Probably the two most important molecules to talk about all year. RNA, they think, evolved first. They actually, part of the geologic timescale, actually can sometimes talk about an RNA world before DNA. The reason is RNA catalyzes protein synthesis. It gets it going. You know, if you remember mRNA and transfer RNA, they're all involved in that. And the other thing is just simple. RNA is single-stranded. It's simpler than DNA. So they think RNA evolved before DNA. Just a little thing you need to know. Now, before we get a cell, you got to have something to hold the cell in, like cell membrane. So one of the things that they have proven with this bubble model is you can actually form these things called microspheres. I've actually made them in lab in college. And basically you trap amino acids, which if you forget what they are, amino acids are the building blocks of proteins, in a lipid bilayer. And this is what they look like in a microscope. They're very, very nice and round and neat looking. They're not true cells. Okay, they don't have heredity. There is no nucleic acid in there, no DNA. They don't split in half on their own. They don't grow. So they're really not true cells, but they are basically cell membranes. And they think this microsphere could have formed with this idea of this bubble model. And sooner or later, maybe eventually you get some nucleic acid inside of there. Maybe eventually one of them can start to divide on its own. Then it is a true cell. It's no longer a microsphere. And you get your first cell that way. That's the theory, of course. Now, the oldest fossils on record, so the first living things, were prokaryotic. If you forget what that means, it means pro before, karyo means nucleus. So these guys don't have a nucleus. These are the real simple things, and commonly called bacteria. This, the first ones were probably cyanobacteria. This is a lake filled with cyanobacteria. Cyano means blue. They kind of turn the lake a bluish green sort of look. And they think that the oldest fossils we find are prokaryotic cyanobacteria. So these guys are not the original cyanobacteria. They are long since gone, but they are definitely modern day examples of them. And that's what we think the first living things were. All right, now when you look at the bacteria, there are basically two types. There are eubacteria and archaebacteria. Eubacteria are the ones that commonly cause disease. These are the guys we usually think about. You get strep throat, you get sick, you need an antibiotic. You're taking something to fight these guys off. Usually, not all of them, but most of them cause disease. And their cell walls, here they are. Some look like hot dogs, some are round, some are spiral. But they have this layer in their cell wall, this chemical called peptidoglycan. We're not going to go into too much detail about this, but it does help them to invade a body. It's harder for them to be broken down, and that's what allows them to get in and make you sick. The archaebacteria are another group. They're actually the ancestor of eukaryotic cells, the guys with the nucleus. And they don't have peptidoglycan. Actually a little bit simpler. These guys are sometimes called extreme bacteria because they live in crazy places on Earth, like inside volcanic vents and really acidic lakes and places that a lot of other living things just don't like and cannot survive. So pretty neat. Two different groups. Again, the eubacteria usually cause disease. I wouldn't worry about the peptidoglycans so much. I don't really expect you to know that. I really would rather you know that the eubacteria are the really kind of the nastier guys that make a lot of us sick. And the archaebacteria probably were the ones that led to modern day eukaryotic cells, the cells with a nucleus. But these guys do not have a nucleus. So we'll talk about how we think that ended up in a second. So here we go. The theory of how you go from a prokaryotic cell to a eukaryotic cell. The most widely accepted theory is called endosymbiosis. Symbiosis means living together. Endo means inside. The idea is a larger cell swallows or engulfs a smaller cell, and they both benefit from this relationship. So what they think is there was this large prokaryote out there, and there were these two small prokaryotes out there. One was heterotrophic, but he could break down energy really, really well. So he was engulfed into the larger prokaryote, and he was really, really good at breaking down sugars and making ATP. This guy over here was really good at photosynthesis. He was good at making the sugar in the first place from light. So he was engulfed. Now, what do these two little guys get out of this relationship? Well, if you live in a world where everyone's single-celled, if you're the smallest guy on the block, you're lunch. You're the one who's going to get eaten by everything else. So it's really to your benefit if you can get inside of a larger cell. Now you kind of have protection. So they think that's why the benefit these two had. The larger cell, what does it get out of it? Well, now it has these specialized little cells inside of it that are doing jobs for it. Making ATP, it's really, really good at breaking down sugar, and this guy's really, really good at making sugar. So they think that's how we started to get some organelles. Mitochondria, chloroplasts. Chloroplasts doing photosynthesis, making sugar. Mitochondria breaking down the sugar into ATP. And eventually it got to a point where these guys couldn't live without the bigger cell, and the bigger cell couldn't live without them. And so these stopped becoming single-celled and actually became a part of the larger cell. That's endosymbiosis. And that's the theory we sort of go with today. Now, when you talk about multicellular organisms, who's first? First group are the protists. We'll talk about these more when we talk about the kingdoms and things like that. What makes a protist a protist? They are eukaryotic, meaning they have a nucleus. They are multicellular. Some are unicellular in this group, and their cells specialize. This is a weird group. They are all over the place. Some act like plants, some act like animals. So some examples are seaweed is actually a protist. Most people think it's a plant. It's not. Euglena is a little single-cell guy, runs around and eats things. So it doesn't look anything like a plant. Acts more like an animal. And then eventually these protists led to fungus, plants, animals, and the other organisms we are going to be talking about in the next few days. So here's just some pictures of some protists. I forget what these guys are called. Here's some seaweed, some green algae there. And then over here, this is a little one-celled thing. Here's his gullet, which means he takes in food, so he's a heterotroph. He's not doing photosynthesis like this guy is. And they're all in the same group. Kind of crazy. We'll talk about that in the next couple of weeks. Now, over time, one of the things you have to keep in mind, and your book talks about these, there have been these mass extinctions, okay? What a mass extinction means, it leaves, they occur over thousands of years. They don't happen immediately. People think like, oh, mass extinction, within 1 week all the dinosaurs were gone. So not true. It means that over thousands of years, large groups of organisms died out. Bad for them, but it leaves openings in the ecosystem for new species to come around. So when the dinosaurs died out, it really gave a chance for the mammals to become different. Up until this point, mammals were these tiny little rodent-like creatures who kind of hiding out all the time. You didn't have lions and tigers and elephants and all kinds of larger things. They think we might be in the 6th mass extinction. It was the 5th one that took out the dinosaurs, but we're not quite sure. It looks like we might be in the middle one. Hard to tell when you're looking over thousands of years. So that's where we're at. So what you should do at this point, stop the video, work on your index cards. Wouldn't hurt if you read the first 2 sections of the chapter. That's what we just covered. And if you have any questions, let me know.